When people talk about the American soldier in the Second World War, they usually speak in the language of legend. They remember the men of Omaha Beach. They remember the paratroopers holding the line at Bastogne. They remember the flag raisers at Iwo Jima. They speak of the greatest generation as if it were one solid wall of unquestioning patriots, marching across oceans to save the world. But war is not built out of legend. War is an industrial meat grinder, and not every man fed into that grinder was fearless. Not every man was made for glory. Some were terrified, boys pushed right to the edge of their minds, then pushed past it. The strain was relentless. Endless artillery, frozen trenches, the sight of friends being torn apart in front of your eyes. That kind of pressure did not just wound bodies, it shattered minds. During the Second World War, the United States military convicted more than 2,1,000 soldiers of desertion. Under the Articles of War, abandoning your post in wartime could, in theory, mean death. 49 of those men were sentenced to die by military courts. And yet, when the war was over, only one American soldier had actually been tied to a post and shot by his own countrymen. Just one. Out of millions who served, and tens of thousands who ran, only one was executed. His name was Private Eddie Slovic, and his death remains one of the most uncomfortable, controversial military executions in modern American history. To understand how Eddie Slovic became the ultimate scapegoat, you have to look at who he was before the uniform, before the rifle, before the army decided his life had become useful as a warning. He was not a warrior. He was not built in the mold of battlefield myth. He was a small-time, unlucky, deeply insecure kid from the hard streets of Detroit. Growing up in the Great Depression, Slovic drifted into trouble early. By his teenage years, he already had a petty criminal record. He stole loose change from a bakery. He took part in joyriding in a stolen car. He got caught. He was convicted. He spent time in a Michigan reformatory. So when the war began, the draft board initially classified him as 4F, morally unfit for military service. To Eddie Slovic, that was a blessing. He had no desire to fight, none at all. With civilian life still open to him, he found steady work at a plumbing company. He married a factory worker named Antoinette. He settled down, and for the first time in his chaotic life, he had something close to peace. A wife, a home, a future. A life insulated from the slaughter unfolding across the Atlantic. But by 1944, the American war machine was bleeding badly. The invasion of Europe was consuming infantrymen at a horrifying, unsustainable rate. The army needed replacements. It needed bodies. And when desperation takes hold, standards begin to fall. Moral standards, physical standards, old disqualifications suddenly disappear. That is when Slovic's small, fragile world collapsed. He was reclassified as 1A. He was drafted. He was handed an M1 rifle, placed on a troop transport, and shipped to the European theater as a replacement infantryman. From the moment he put on the uniform, fear took hold of him and never let go. He told anyone who would listen that he was too scared to fight. He said he could not shoot another human being. He said that if they sent him to the line, he would run. Nobody listened. The army did not want explanations. It wanted manpower. So Eddie Slovic was pushed into the notorious American replacement system, moving through replacement depots that GIs bitterly called Repel-Depel. The men who entered that system were not treated like brothers in arms. They were treated like spare parts. Unlike paratroopers or veteran infantry divisions that trained together for years and formed bonds before battle, replacements were shoved into the holes left behind by the dead. They were inserted into broken units, into foxholes filled with strangers, often without even learning the names of the men beside them before the shells began to fall. In August 1944, Slovic was assigned to the 28th Infantry Division. Officially, it was the Keystone Division. But after what it had endured in the savage Hurtgen Forest, many of its men called it something else. The Bloody Bucket. They were a unit already torn open by war. German artillery had ripped through them. Tree bursts had shredded men where they stood. Machine guns had chewed them apart from entrenched positions. These were not fresh soldiers waiting to welcome a newcomer. They were exhausted survivors, carrying trauma like extra weight on their backs. And before Slovic even properly joined them, he got a glimpse of what awaited him. On the way to the front, he and another replacement came under heavy artillery fire. Panic took over. The two men dug in, became separated from their detachment, and disappeared from the chain of movement. For 6 weeks, Slovic stayed behind the lines with a Canadian military police unit. There, he made himself useful. He cooked, he cleaned, he kept busy, he stayed alive. But eventually, the Canadians had to turn him back over to the Americans. When he finally rejoined his unit, something remarkable happened. His commander told him that no charges would be filed. He was being given a clean slate. a second chance. The army, at least for that moment, was willing to wipe the board clean and send him forward. But the brief taste of artillery had already done its work. Whatever weak resolve Eddie Slovik once possessed had been broken completely. He told his commanding officer, Captain Ralph Grot, that if he was sent into combat, he would run away. Grot told him to stop talking nonsense. He handed him a rifle. He ordered him to his post, and that is when Eddie Slovik did something almost unheard of. He did not obey. He did not pretend. He did not hide behind confusion or accident. He walked away from his unit, went to the rear, found an American military cook, and handed over a handwritten confession on a scrap of paper. It was blunt. It was direct. It was undeniable. He wrote that he had already told his commanding officer his story. He wrote that he had said if he had to go out there again, he would run away. He wrote that the officer said there was nothing he could do for him. And then Slovik wrote the sentence that sealed his fate. He wrote that he had run away again, and that he would run away again if they sent him back out there. This was not a mistake. This was not confusion. This was a desperate calculation. Slovik was not foolish. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knew there were thousands of men disappearing in the rear, hiding in places like Paris, abandoning their posts, and ending up court-martialed or locked inside military prisons. To Eddie Slovik, a prison cell in the rear sounded like mercy, warm walls, safety, distance from artillery, distance from frozen mud, distance from the possibility of having his body torn apart in Germany. He did not want to fight the court-martial. He wanted the court-martial. He wanted the jail cell. When his trial convened in November 1944, a panel of 9 staff officers sat in judgment over him. Even then, he was given chances. More than one. Military lawyers offered him the opportunity to tear up the confession, pick up his rifle, and return to his unit without permanent consequences. The door was still open. The army was still offering him a path back. He refused. He stood by the confession. He chose to make his fear official. He chose not to go back. The tribunal sentenced him to death. Even then, Eddie Slovik did not panic, because he believed he understood the unwritten rule of the United States Army. Men were sentenced to die, yes, but they were not actually shot. Death sentences were used to frighten soldiers, to maintain discipline on paper, and then quietly commuted by higher command into dishonorable discharge or hard labor. That was the logic Slovik trusted. That was the bet he made. And it was a bet made at the worst possible moment. By December 1944, Eddie Slovik's timing turned from bad to catastrophic. The Germans launched a massive winter offensive that slammed into the Allied lines without warning. It was desperate, it was violent, and it became one of the most brutal crises of the war in Europe. The Battle of the Bulge. American casualties were staggering. Entire divisions were being hammered, overrun, and driven backward through freezing forests and snow-covered roads. Morale was fraying, men were exhausted, men were terrified, and in the bitter cold, with artillery crashing down and German pressure building, soldiers were abandoning their posts at an alarming rate. This was the moment when Slovik's case climbed the chain of command. Major General Norman Dutch Kota, the hard-fighting commander of the 28th Division, was watching his lines come apart under unbearable strain. When Slovik's plea for clemency landed on his desk, Kota did not see a frightened, broken kid from Detroit. He did not see a man who needed psychiatric help. He saw something else entirely. He saw a contagion. To Kota, the danger was not just Eddie Slovik himself. The danger was the example. If soldiers discovered that a man could hand over a polite written confession, refuse combat, and escape the frozen front for the comfort of a prison cell in the rear, then others might follow. One man could become 10, 10 could become hundreds, and in a moment when the army needed every rifle to hold the line, that possibility looked intolerable. So Kota rejected the plea. The appeal moved higher. It climbed past division level. It went all the way to the top, landing on the desk of Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight D. Eisenhower. Eisenhower was now staring at the worst military crisis of the European war. He needed discipline. He needed men to stay in their foxholes. He needed the line held at any cost. And so he agreed with the cold logic beneath Kota's decision. They needed to make an example, a brutal one, a final one, a warning that could not be misunderstood. Eddie Slovik became that warning. Eisenhower signed the execution order. On the bitterly cold morning of January 31st, 1945, in the French village of Sainte-Marie-aux-Mines, Private Eddie Slovik was led into a walled courtyard. Waiting for him was a firing squad of 12 American soldiers armed with M1 Garands. According to military custom, one rifle contained a blank round, so that no individual man could ever know with absolute certainty whether he had fired the shot that killed an American citizen. Slovik was strapped tightly to a thick wooden post. A black hood was pulled over his head. An army doctor pinned a small white target directly above his heart. In his final moments, a Catholic chaplain, Father Carl Cummings, spoke with him. What Eddie Slovic said before he died has echoed through history ever since. He did not rage against the country. He did not beg for mercy. He did not collapse into hysterics. Instead, he spoke with a kind of tragic clarity that made the whole event even more disturbing. He said they were not shooting him for deserting the United States Army. He said thousands of men had done that. He said they needed to make an example out of somebody, and that he was the one because he was an ex-con. He said he used to steal things when he was a kid, and that was what they were really shooting him for. At 10:04 a.m., the order was given. The rifles fired. The volley of M1 Garand shots cracked through the winter air and echoed off the stone walls of the courtyard. Eddie Slovic slumped against the ropes. The doctor stepped forward, checked for a pulse, and pronounced him dead. He was the only American soldier executed for desertion during the Second World War. The army understood immediately how terrible this would look if the public ever truly saw it. So the execution was buried, hidden beneath silence and bureaucracy. When the war ended, Slovic's widow, Antoinette, was told only that her husband had died in the European theater. She was denied his GI life insurance. She was denied his pension. But no one told her the truth. For years, she believed her husband had died in combat. Then, in 1954, journalist William Bradford Hui uncovered the story and published a book about the case. Only then did Antoinette learn that her husband had not fallen before the enemy. He had been executed by his own government. The revelation caused outrage, and it deepened the cruelty of what had already happened. It was not just death, it was concealment. It was disgrace wrapped in official silence. And the humiliation did not end with the firing squad. The army buried Eddie Slovic in Plot E of the Oisine American Cemetery in France. Plot E was not an ordinary burial ground. It was a hidden, walled-off section reserved for soldiers executed for crimes considered especially vile, men condemned for rape and murder. There, a terrified private from Detroit, a man who never even fired his weapon in combat, was buried among the worst criminals in uniform. It was a final act of judgment, a final branding of his name with disgrace. But Antoinette Slovic refused to let the story end there. She spent the rest of her life, and nearly all of her money, petitioning the American government to pardon her husband and bring his body home. She appealed to 7 different United States presidents. She fought year after year, driven by grief, by anger, and by the conviction that whatever Eddie Slovic had done, what the army had done to him was something darker still. In the 1970s, Frank Sinatra even acquired the rights to Slovic's story, with the intention of making a film. But the political backlash came fast and hard. The pressure was so intense that the project was abandoned before it could fully materialize. Antoinette died in 1979. She died without seeing Eddie return to American soil. It was not until 1987, 42 years after Eddie Slovic was executed, that the United States government finally allowed his remains to be exhumed from Plot E. After decades of silence, after decades of petitions, after decades of shame pressed down on one dead man's name, his body was flown back to Detroit. At last, he was buried beside Antoinette. That ending came far too late to undo anything. It did not erase the courtyard. It did not erase the firing squad. It did not erase the calculations made in offices far above the battlefield. But it did force the story back into the open. And once it was there, it could no longer be hidden behind slogans about heroism, duty, and the so-called good war. Because the story of Eddie Slovic tears away the polished Hollywood veneer from the Second World War. It strips away the comforting mythology. It forces us to look straight at the brutal arithmetic of military command. An army fighting in Europe was losing men at a rate it could barely sustain. Infantry replacements were being fed into a battlefield that devoured them. Shell fire, cold, exhaustion, terror, and the knowledge that death could come in an instant were pushing ordinary soldiers toward collapse. Commanders understood that fear was spreading. They understood that desertion, or even the thought of desertion, could spread with it. And so the institution reached for something ancient, something ruthless, something meant to freeze every man in place. Example, through terror. In order to force tens of thousands of men to keep walking into the meat grinder of Nazi Germany, the United States Army had to prove that the terror waiting behind the lines could be just as deadly as the terror waiting at the front. That is the cold truth sitting at the center of Eddie Slovic's death. He was not executed because he helped the enemy. He was not executed because he committed murder. He was not executed because he betrayed battle plans or sold out his country to Germany. He died because the army was terrified of what other frightened men might do if they believed there was an escape. That is what makes his case so disturbing. Eddie Slovic was not a hero in the traditional sense. He did not perform some last-minute act of redemption. He did not charge a machine gun nest. He did not save his platoon. He was a scared man who openly admitted that he could not endure combat. He tried to choose prison over the front. He made that choice in writing. And for that, when the Battle of the Bulge had pushed Allied command into one of its darkest corners, the highest levels of military leadership decided his life could serve a purpose greater than his survival. He became a message written in gunfire. Major General Norman Dutch Cota saw in him a contagion that had to be stopped. General Dwight D. Eisenhower saw a crisis that had to be controlled at all costs. Between those judgments, Eddie Slovic ceased to be a single damaged private from Detroit and became something more useful to the machine. A body, a warning, a sacrifice meant to frighten others back into line. That is why his death still echoes. Because it was not just an execution. It was friendly fire authorized by the highest office in the military. It was the state turning its rifles inward, not out of revenge, not out of battlefield necessity in the immediate sense, but out of fear. Fear of collapse, fear of panic. Fear that if one man could refuse, others would follow. And in that sense, Eddie Slovic was not only a casualty of war, he was a casualty of what war does to institutions. It hardens them, it strips away mercy. It reduces people to examples, numbers, instruments, warnings. In that world, the distinction between justice and utility can vanish with terrifying speed. That is the final weight of his story. Out of more than 2,100